Hi guys, thank you all for tuning in and welcome back to Sewing Clara. In this tutorial I will show you how to stitch on beads. Beads can be a really pretty embellishment. They are usually quite inexpensive, so with just a few bucks you can make something unique of your simple piece. The list of sewing supplies that you will need for our today's project is as always listed in the video description. And once you have your sewing supplies ready, we can jump right into this. For our project, I have decided I wanted to work with these golden beads because I already stitched through the edges and through the center with an orangey denim yarn, so I think it will go well with the entire theme here. So I have here beading needles and an invisible yarn. If you want to learn more about the types of needles and yarns, there are videos dedicated to these subjects in this course as well, so you can go ahead and watch them. My plan for this project is to stitch the beads in a row around the outer edge of the mask, and then I want to have a snowflake on this side. So I basically made a cross, that's the center of the snowflake, and then I made a smaller cross here at 45 degrees angles, and then each end should have crossed sections. And I will start stitching on the beads for the snowflake. I will use the invisible yarn, and that is mainly for the convenience. I could of course use yellowish yarn for these beads, it wouldn't matter, but I find that when I use the invisible yarn and I should accidentally stitch through the lining, then it's not gonna be so bad. I will still try to stitch only through the denim, but should I accidentally stitch through the lining, since the yarn is invisible, it wouldn't be so bad. So I stitched through. I went a little bit further from the edge. I have here the knot on my invisible yarn, and I stitched through where the snowflake starts. I always like putting few of the beads into the cap of the packaging, and then I will simply stitch the first bead in place like so. So I will pull it over the needle, and I stitch very closely to the place where the thread came through, about 2 millimeters away, and I make one running stitch. Then I grab another bead, I will pull it on my thread, and I will do back stitch, and that's basically the way I will be stitching the entire time. So basically the first stitch, you kind of return to the beginning of your line, make one running stitch, and then you will continue doing back stitches. Occasionally I like pulling the needle through, because that way it connects the beads, and stitching below back to where I was, because that way they stay nicely together. That's just how I like doing it. Now I'm here where I should have the crossed section, so I'm gonna stitch on a few beads like so. So I pulled the bead on my thread, I will make one running stitch, and then one back stitch, now I will pull on two beads because I made the stitch a little bit too long and that wouldn't look good, and instead of going through the fabric I will pull through both of these beads, and that way the result looks nicer. That's also another way how you can do it. So I know now I will have 3 beads on each side for this crossed section on the snowflake. So I will simply pull 3 beads on here, pull them on my thread, and I will simply stitch back towards the center. And that way I created this section. So that's another way of how to do it. It is a little bit faster if you stitch on a few beads at a time than just one by one. So let's do it again. So I will stitch 3 beads in place. Basically do a running stitch. Then again, put 3 beads on my needle and pull them over on my yarn and do the back stitch. So that's what it would look like. Or you can simply go on and stitch them on one by one. Whatever works for you the best. You just have to play with this a little bit and see whichever technique is more convenient, what also looks better to you. So I will finish this line and make this cross section, and then we'll take it from there. I finished my first line. I stitched the needle through to the inner side of the mask, to the lining, and I'll do the sew up here on a really small spot. So I started stitching the second line, and again, I'm kind of playing with this and always grabbing 2 or 3 beads at the same time, stitching them in place, and occasionally I return through at least 1 bead so that when I start the next row that the rows will be nicely connected. So here I stitched, when I made the stitch after I placed the next 3 beads, I made basically a back stitch that ends right behind the last bead. And now I pulled my thread again through the last bead and the thread is coming out of the last bead. So when I pull over my needle further beads, they will be nicely connected with this line. And you can also stitch certain sections in place like so, because the thread is invisible. So basically make a whip stitch around the sections that tend to kind of move out of the way. And in general, the problem here is that I stitched too many beads in place and it's too close and they tend to push at least one of them out of the way. So sometimes less is more. So I just finished with the last section, so I will pinch the needle through so that I will come through on the other side. I will do my sew up and then we will be able to start stitching around the edge. Now around the edge, theoretically, I could grab another thread. I could work with an orange thread. However, I do like this invisible thread because whenever you have a situation where you kind of need to stitch back and forth, it is definitely more forgiving because it is invisible, like the name suggests. So I will continue working with it. Alright, now we can start stitching the beads around the edge. So I will again put a few into my cap. I will start over here in the corner. I will put on my first bead and do a back stitch, and then I will keep putting on multiple beads because then it's gonna be faster to stitch around the edge. So here you can see that as long as I'm making sure that the beads are not too close to each other, they create a really nice line. And the way I'm doing it, when I'm always pulling over my needle couple of beads at the same time, it goes also quite fast than what it would take if I would stitch one bead at a time. The trick for me personally is to pull several beads on my thread and to simply lay them down like so without pinching them together, and then making my back stitch, making sure that nothing's being pulled too tight. And then also I always turn my work around a couple of times, whichever way it makes sense. And then I pull through the last bead and you see how nicely flat they are positioned. And one more thing, I personally find that stitching on only 4 to 5 beads at the same time is actually neater. I went with 8 and I found that they were a little bit too loose. And then I went backwards and I did the whip stitch, but that kind of messed up with the line. So I'm just gonna stick to 4 or 5 beads at the same time and rather work a little bit slower. But then I don't have to go back with the whip stitch and I don't have to mess up with my line. And here we have the result. The drawing for the snowflake is available in the download section on this platform. If you want to know how to make such facial masks, there is a tutorial as a part of this course. And there's also a tutorial for easy embroideries if you're interested. And that is all. I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial and that you found it helpful. Thank you all for watching and happy sewing!